Okay, so today we're going to be looking at this pretty wild book by Conrad Riker called Universal Mind, Theology of Infocognition.
Yeah, this is definitely a fascinating one.
It really is. And, we're going to be going deep on some pretty big questions like reality,
Consciousness.
purpose.
Yeah, all the big ones.
It's definitely not your typical theological text.
right.
Riker uses all this stuff like information theory and cognitive science.
To build what he calls the C.T.M.U, right?
Yeah, the cognitive theological model of the universe.
Which is quite a mouthful.
It is.
Yeah, so instead of thinking about, the universe as this kind of cold, random, meaningless place,
Right.
he's saying, well, let's consider it as a self-processing system.
Like a thought experiment.
Like a divine thought experiment where everything is connected.
Mm-hmm. And that's where this idea of divine syntax comes in.
Okay,
This is a really central concept to the C.T.M.U.
okay.
And he's talking about this structured logic that underpins all of reality.
So it's like a code
Yeah, like a set of rules.
that governs how the universe operates. Precisely.
Okay.
Instead of thinking about God as this being separate from the universe, we're talking about a God who's embedded in the very fabric of reality,
Okay, so it's like
in the logic.
in the logic that drives everything.
Exactly.
Okay.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Riker argues that because we're made in God's image, our minds reflect the structure.
Okay.
So our ability to reason, to think logically, to be creative,
These aren't just random.
these aren't just random accidents.
They're imprints of this.
They're imprints of this divine syntax within us.
So those moments when you have like a sudden insight or everything just clicks,
Yes.
you're tapping into.
You're tapping into that universal logic,
Okay.
that divine spark.
It's like our minds are aligning with the code of the universe.
Precisely.
That's a really cool way to think about it.
It is. And this idea that the universe is a self-simulating entity, constantly processing information and creating reality,
Yeah.
that's not something that Riker just made up. It actually echoes ancient creation myths.
Oh, you mean like when they say the universe was like spoken into existence?
Right.
Or thought into existence?
Yeah.
I always thought that was just like a metaphor.
Right.
Like a poetic way.
But Riker suggests that those myths might hold a deeper truth
Then we realize.
than we realize. What if these ancient stories are more than just metaphors?
Right.
What if they reflect an intuitive understanding of how reality works?
Okay, yeah. That is pretty mind-blowing.
Okay.
So we've got this universe that's like this divine thought experiment running on this code called divine syntax.
Mm-hmm.
But what about all the bad stuff?
Right.
Like the suffering and the chaos and the, evil that we see in the world?
Yeah, how does that fit into this picture?
where does that fit in?
Well, Riker actually addresses this through his interpretation of sin,
Okay.
but he doesn't see it as just some moral failing.
Right.
He describes it as like a syntactic misalignment
Oh, wow.
with divine will, like a bug in the system.
Oh, so it's not just about being like a bad person
Right. It's about being out of sync with,
with that universal code,
okay,
with the logic.
with that divine logic.
Yeah, and in this framework, grace isn't just about forgiveness.
Right.
It's about this recursive process
Yeah.
that helps correct those errors.
So it's like
A realignment with divine purpose.
you're getting back in sync.
You're getting back in sync with the code.
So those times when you feel like you're being nudged back on course, like
Yeah.
something's guiding you.
That's grace at work,
Okay.
helping you synchronize with the divine plan.
Yeah, I can see that.
Now, all this talk about divine will and, a predetermined system,
Right.
it raises a big question. What about free will?
Yeah, if God knows everything,
Yeah.
then do we really have a choice?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's always been a little bit of a head scratcher for me.
It is a tricky one.
Yeah.
How can we have free will if everything's already known?
Yeah.
Well, Riker argues that God's foreknowledge doesn't negate our free will.
He knows the choices we'll make, but that doesn't mean he's forcing our hand.
Okay.
It's more like he understands all the possibilities within the system he created,
Okay.
but we still get to choose.
Okay, so it's like God's created the game.
Right.
He knows all the rules.
He knows all the rules.
But we're still the ones playing.
Exactly.
Our choices still matter.
They do, even if they're part of a bigger plan.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah. And because we have free will within the system, we're also responsible for our choices.
Right.
Our actions have consequences even within a divine plan. We still have a duty to act in accordance with divine principles.
So it's like saying that even if you know someone's going to make a mistake,
Right.
you can't stop them from learning from
You
it.
can't stop them from learning from it.
They still have to experience the consequences of their actions.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Now, this brings us to another challenging question.
Yeah.
If there's a divine plan and it's all based on logic and goodness,
Mm-hmm.
Why is there so much evil and suffering in the world?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah.
How can a loving God allow bad things to happen?
That's a question a lot of people wrestle with.
For sure.
And Riker's answer to this is pretty thought-provoking.
Okay.
He suggests that evil isn't some flaw in God's design,
Right.
but rather a consequence of free will.
Oh.
It's like the shadow side of choice.
Okay.
We need that contrast of evil to truly understand good.
So it's like you can't have light without darkness.
You can't have light without darkness.
You can't have happiness without sadness.
Exactly. And Riker doesn't leave us with a completely bleak outlook either.
Okay.
He suggests that this evil is temporary.
Okay.
As the universe evolves, it moves towards greater harmony, greater alignment with that divine will.
So it's not all doom and gloom.
Not all.
There's actually a plan for things to get better.
There is. And here's the most interesting part.
Okay.
Understanding all this isn't just some abstract intellectual exercise.
Right.
It has real practical implications for how we live our lives.
So it actually changes things.
It does.
How so?
Well, consider prayer, for example.
Okay.
Riker reframes prayer as this infocognitive synchronization.
Okay.
It's not just pleading with God for things.
Right.
It's about actively aligning your mind and heart with the divine will.
So it's like becoming
That underlying logic of the universe.
a conscious participant in the creative process of reality.
Exactly.
That's a really cool way to think about it.
It is. And that's a powerful idea. It means that our thoughts, our intentions, our actions, they all have a ripple effect on the universe.
Wow. Okay. So instead of feeling powerless, we actually have the ability to like influence the universe.
We do.
To co-create with God.
To co-create with God.
By aligning ourselves with that divine syntax.
That's back.
Wow. Okay. I think we need to unpack this idea of divine communication a little bit further.
Sure.
You mentioned like the universe is like a language.
Yeah.
But what does that actually look like? I mean,
Right.
is God sending us emails or something?
Not quite. But think about it this way. Human language is all about structure, right? Conveying meaning through symbols and syntax. Riker argues that the universe operates on a similar principle.
Okay.
The laws of physics, the patterns in nature, the way things interact, it's all part of this divine language.
So instead of words,
Yeah.
God is communicating through like the laws of nature.
Mm-hmm. The patterns of the universe.
Okay.
And just like learning a new language,
Right.
understanding this divine language takes time and effort.
Yeah.
But the more we decode it, the more we understand the mind of God.
Okay, but how do we actually decode this language? Do we
Right.
need to like become physicists or mathematicians or something?
It helps to have a scientific understanding.
Yeah.
But that's not the only way. Think about it. Every time a scientist discovers a new law of physics, they're decoding a piece of divine thought.
Oh, wow.
But we can also access this language through observation,
Okay.
through contemplation, experiencing the beauty and complexity of the natural world.
So it's not just about equations and formulas.
Yeah.
It's about like appreciating the beauty of a sunset, the complexity of a flower,
Exactly.
the vastness of the universe.
These are all expressions of divine thought,
Wow.
divine communication,
So we're surrounded by this divine language all the time,
all the time,
whether we realize it or not.
whether we realize it or not.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
But what about those moments when it feels like God is speaking directly to us,
right.
like through a dream or a sudden inspiration?
Yeah.
How does that fit in?
Well, Riker argues that our minds are actually designed to receive these divine messages,
Yep.
these flashes of insight and inspiration.
Okay.
He talks about intuition as a direct line to divine wisdom,
Okay.
a way of bypassing the limitations of our human reasoning.
So it's like we have this built-in receiver
Yeah.
for divine communication.
But we need to learn how to tune it properly.
Yeah. How do we do that?
Well, that's where things like prayer and meditation come in.
Okay.
They help us quiet the noise of our minds.
Yeah. To become more receptive to those divine messages.
So they're like fine-tuning that receiver,
Exactly.
making it more sensitive to the subtle signals.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've got this divine syntax, this universal logic that governs everything, and we can tap into that logic through our own minds.
Right.
But what about logic itself?
Yeah.
Is that a divine attribute?
Absolutely. Riker argues that logic isn't just a human invention. It's a reflection of the divine mind. God's thoughts are perfectly logical.
Okay.
And because we're made in God's image, we have that capacity for logic as well.
So it's not just about being able to solve like math problems or write code.
No.
It's about being able to think clearly,
Mm-hmm.
to reason, to make sense of the world around us.
It's a fundamental part of who we are.
Okay.
And this logic isn't just theoretical. It's woven into the very fabric of reality.
Okay.
The laws of physics, the principles of mathematics, the order we see in nature, it's all evidence of this divine logic at work. Okay, that makes sense. But what about those times when life just feels illogical?
Right.
When things happen that just don't make sense?
Yeah.
Where's the logic in suffering and tragedy?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
And it's one that Riker doesn't shy away from.
Okay.
He suggests that even in those moments, there's a deeper logic at play.
Okay.
A logic that may
Yeah.
be beyond our human comprehension.
So it's not that God is being illogical.
Right.
It's that we might not have the capacity to fully understand his logic.
Exactly. And this ties back to that idea of faith.
Okay.
Sometimes we need to trust that there's a bigger picture,
Mm-hmm.
a deeper logic, even when we can't see it.
Yeah. I can see how that fits in.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got this universe that's running on divine logic.
Right.
This divine language that we can learn to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And this divine spark within us that allows us to connect with God.
Yes.
But what about our individual purpose within all of this?
Right.
How do we figure out what we're supposed to be doing with our lives?
That's a great question. And that's where the concept of teleology comes in.
Okay.
Teleology is the study of purpose.
Okay.
And Riker argues that teleology is built into the very fabric of the universe.
Yeah.
Everything has a purpose, a reason for existing.
Okay.
And our individual purpose is part of that larger divine plan.
So it's not about just finding a job that we like or a hobby that we enjoy.
All right.
It's about discovering like our role in this grand cosmic scheme.
Exactly. And Riker suggests that we can discover our purpose by aligning ourselves with the divine will,
Okay.
by tapping into that divine spark within us.
Okay.
It's about listening to that intuition, that inner voice that guides us toward our true path.
Okay, but how do we actually do that?
Right.
I mean, is there like a step-by-step guide?
There's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Well-
Riker suggests that practices like prayer meditation and self-reflection can help us to quiet our minds, to listen to our intuition, and become more receptive to divine guidance.
So it's about creating space in our lives
Yeah,
for the divine,
creating space
for God to speak to us.
Exactly. And the more we do that, the more we'll start to see those coincidences and synchronicities
Yeah.
that point us in the right direction.
It's like the universe is conspiring to help us fulfill our purpose.
It is.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So we're not just passive observers in this cosmic drama.
Right?
We're active participants co-creating with God.
Wow.
And that brings us to a really empowering idea, infocognition.
Okay.
We've been dancing around that term.
Yeah, we've mentioned it a few times.
Let's break it down a little bit further.
Yeah, what exactly is infocognition?
Yeah, and how does it fit into this whole picture?
Yeah.
So infocognition is this idea that the universe isn't just a physical system.
Right.
It's an information processing system,
Okay.
a vast network of data that's constantly being analyzed and interpreted.
Wait, so are we talking about the universe as like a giant computer?
In a way, yes. Think about it. Every interaction, every event, every thought is a piece of data being processed by a cosmic intelligence.
Wow.
And we, as conscious beings, are part of that system.
Oh.
Our thoughts, our actions, our intentions, they're all part of that data that's being processed.
Wow. So instead of feeling insignificant,
Right.
we're actually part of this.
We're part of this incredible
Incredible cosmic dance.
cosmic dance of information and consciousness.
Exactly. And that brings us to the idea of divine thought.
Yes.
Riker's arguing that the universe isn't just a product of divine creation.
Right.
It's a reflection of divine thought.
Yeah.
This ongoing process of creation that's happening all the time. So it's not like God created the universe and then just like stepped back.
No, he's actively
thinking.
thinking, creating, and sustaining the universe in every moment.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And the more we understand about the nature of divine thought, the more we can appreciate the beauty and complexity of God's creation.
Okay. But how do we actually understand divine thought?
Right.
Do we need to become like theologians or philosophers or something?
It can help to study theology and philosophy. But Riker suggests that we can also access divine thought through observation, through contemplation, and through spiritual practice.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's about paying attention to the world around us.
Yes.
Noticing the patterns, appreciating the beauty, and using practices like prayer and meditation to connect with the divine.
Precisely.
And the more we do that, the more we'll start to see the fingerprints of divine thought everywhere we look.
Everywhere.
This is all incredibly fascinating,
It is.
but it's also a lot to process.
It is.
Maybe we should take a break here,
Sure.
and we'll come back to this in part 2 of our deep dive.
Sounds good. Picking up where we left off, that idea of divine thought as this constantly unfolding process is really key to understanding the C.T.M.U. It suggests that reality isn't static. It's dynamic. It's evolving.
So it's like saying the universe is a work in progress.
Yeah.
And we're all part of that creative process.
Exactly. And this brings us back to that idea of infocognition.
Okay.
If the universe is this vast network of information being processed, then our thoughts, our intentions, our actions all contribute to that data stream.
Okay, so how does that work in practice?
Right?
How can we make sure our thoughts and actions are aligned with that divine thought, with that creative process?
That's where things like prayer and meditation come in.
Okay.
Even just mindful living. They help us to quiet the noise of our ego,
Right.
to become more aware of the flow of information around us,
Okay.
and to make choices that are more in harmony with the divine plan.
So it's not just about sitting on a mountaintop and meditating.
Right.
It's about bringing that awareness into our everyday life.
Exactly. In our relationship.
Into our work.
Into our work.
Living with intention, with purpose, recognizing that every choice we make has a ripple effect on the universe.
Yeah, that's a lot of responsibility.
It is.
But it's also incredibly empowering.
It is. It means we're not just victims of circumstance.
Right.
We have the power to shape reality.
Precisely. And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of the C.T.M.U. Riker's interpretation of the soul. Oh yeah, the soul.
Okay, let's talk about the soul. It's one of those concepts that's often, shrouded in mystery and speculation.
Sure.
What's Riker's take on it?
Well, he suggests that the soul isn't some vague, ethereal entity,
Okay.
but a very real structure, an infocognitive structure, to be precise.
So, like, our soul is our own personal code.
Yeah, our unique signals.
Within the divine system.
Exactly. And this code, the soul structure, is shaped by our choices, our experiences, our relationships. It's a dynamic entity that continues to evolve even after physical death.
Okay, so our soul is this infocognitive structure that's shaped by our lives.
Yes.
But what happens to it after we die?
Right.
What's the C.T.M.U's take on the afterlife?
Well, Riker suggests that the soul doesn't just disappear.
Okay.
It continues to evolve and grow within the divine system.
Okay.
He talks about heaven and hell not as physical places,
Right.
but as states of being, states of alignment or misalignment with that divine will,
Okay.
with that universal logic we've been discussing.
So it's not about going to a pearly gated paradise or a fiery underworld.
Right. It's about the state of our soul, our alignment with God.
Okay. That makes sense. But what about reincarnation?
Reincarnation.
Yeah, does the C.T.M.U. address that?
That's an interesting question, and one that Riker doesn't specifically address in this book.
Okay.
However, the idea of the soul as an infocognitive structure could potentially be compatible with various interpretations of reincarnation.
Okay, so we've got this soul, this infocognitive code
Yes.
that persists beyond physical death,
Right.
continues to evolve. But what about our connection with God in the here and now?
Yes.
How can we strengthen that connection while we're still alive?
Riker places a strong emphasis on the power of prayer.
Okay.
But he sees prayer not just as petitioning God for things, but as a practice of infracognitive synchronization.
We talked about that a bit earlier.
We did.
Could you remind me what that actually means?
Sure. It's about aligning our minds and hearts with the divine will, with that underlying logic of the universe.
Okay.
It's about becoming a conscious participant in the creative process of reality.
So it's not just about asking God for things.
Right.
It's about aligning ourselves with His will, with His purpose.
Exactly. And when we do that, we tap into a power that's far greater than ourselves.
Okay.
We become co-creators with God,
Okay.
participating in the unfolding of His plan.
Okay. But how do we actually do that?
Right?
How do we align ourselves with divine will?
It's a lifelong process.
Yeah.
But Riker suggests that practices like prayer meditation, self-reflection, studying sacred texts can help us to quiet our minds, to listen to our intuition,
Okay.
to become more receptive to divine guidance.
So it's about creating space in our lives for the divine.
Creating space.
For God to speak to us.
Exactly. And the more we do that, the more we'll start to experience those synchronicities,
Right.
those moments where it feels like the universe is conspiring to help us.
It's like we're getting little glimpses of that divine plan unfolding.
Exactly.
That's a powerful idea.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder if we're all part of this infocognitive system.
Right.
If our thoughts and actions have a real impact on the universe, then what about things like miracles?
Miracles.
Yeah, how do they fit into this picture?
Well, miracles are one of those things that often get dismissed as superstition or wishful thinking.
Right.
But within the framework of the C.T.M.U., miracles aren't just anomalies. They're revelations.
Okay.
They're glimpses into a deeper level of reality.
So it's not that miracles break the laws of nature,
Right.
but that they reveal a deeper level of reality
They reveal a deeper level
that we don't normally have access to.
that we don't normally have access to. And this is where faith comes in.
Okay.
Faith isn't just about believing in something unseen.
Right.
It's about being open to the possibility that there's more to reality than what we can see and measure.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about those who say that miracles are just coincidences, or that they can be explained away by science?
Sure, there will always be skeptics,
Right.
and that's perfectly fine. But for those who have experienced a miracle,
Mm-hmm.
there's often a deep sense of knowing,
Okay.
a certainty that something extraordinary has occurred.
Yeah.
And this certainty, this faith,
Mhm.
can be incredibly transformative.
So it's not about trying to prove miracles to others,
Right.
but about recognizing the power that they have in our own lives.
Exactly. And this is where discernment comes in.
Okay.
It's about being able to distinguish between true miracles, which
Right.
are aligned with divine will, and those that may be misinterpretations or wishful thinking.
Okay, that's an important distinction.
It is.
So we need to approach miracles
Right.
with a healthy dose of skepticism,
Yes,
but also with an openness to the possibility that they can occur.
exactly.
But how do miracles actually happen?
Right.
What's the mechanism behind them?
That's a question that's difficult to answer definitively.
Yeah.
But the C.T.M.U. suggests that miracles are a result of infocognitive processes,
Yep.
of the interplay between human consciousness and the divine mind.
Okay.
In other words, they're not just random events,
Right.
but purposeful interventions that occur within the framework of divine syntax.
So it's like saying that our thoughts, our intentions, our prayers can actually have an impact on the fabric of reality.
Exactly. And this is where the C.T.M.U. gets really exciting.
Okay.
It suggests that we're not just passive observers in the universe.
Right.
We're active participants.
Mm-hmm.
And our consciousness has the ability to interact with the divine mind
Okay.
to shape reality.
Okay, so we're talking about miracles as these glimpses into a deeper level of reality.
Yes.
As purposeful interventions
Purposeful intervention
that occur within the framework of divine syntax.
within that framework.
And as evidence of the power of human consciousness to interact with the divine mind.
Exactly.
But what's the purpose of miracles?
Right.
Why do they happen?
There are many possible reasons why miracles occur. Sometimes they serve as signs of divine intervention, pointing us toward a greater truth or purpose.
Okay.
Other times they may be acts of healing, restoration, or protection. And still other times they may simply be expressions of divine love and grace, reminders that we're not alone in the universe.
So miracles can have different meanings and purposes,
Yes.
but they always point to something beyond the ordinary.
Beyond the ordinary.
Something that transcends our limited human understanding.
Exactly. And that's why they're so fascinating and inspiring.
Yeah.
Miracles remind us that there's more to reality than meets the eye, that there's a deeper order, a divine intelligence at work in the universe.
Okay, this has been incredibly insightful.
It has.
But before we move on, I want to touch on a concept that we mentioned a few times.
Sure.
Faith.
Theodore.
It's a word that's loaded with different meanings and interpretation.
Absolutely.
What does faith actually mean in the context of the C.T.M.U?
Well, in the context of the C.T.M.U, faith is more than just blind belief.
Okay.
It's about aligning your understanding with the structure of reality, with that divine syntax that governs everything.
So it's not about ignoring evidence or logic.
Right.
It's about seeing faith and reason as compatible.
Exactly. Faith is about trusting in the order of the universe, in the divine intelligence that created it.
Yeah.
And this trust, this faith, can actually enhance our understanding of the world.
Okay, I can see how that works. But what about doubt?
Doubt.
Yeah, is doubt the opposite of faith?
Not necessarily. Doubt can actually be a healthy part of the spiritual journey.
Okay.
It can lead us to ask deeper questions, to explore different perspectives,
Well-
and to ultimately strengthen our faith.
So it's okay to question things.
That's okay to
To
question,
wrestle with doubt.
to wrestle with doubt.
It doesn't mean that we're losing our faith.
It doesn't mean we're losing our faith. In fact, Riker suggests that grappling with doubt can actually lead us to a more mature and nuanced understanding of faith.
Okay, that's reassuring.
Yeah.
But what about those times when it feels like our faith is being tested,
Right.
when we're going through difficult times? How do we hold on to faith when things are falling apart?
That's where the concept of infocognitive resilience comes in.
Okay.
It's the ability to stay grounded in spiritual truth.
Okay.
even when the world around us feels chaotic and uncertain.
So it's like building a mental and spiritual foundation
And
that can withstand the storms of life.
Exactly. And faith is the cornerstone of that foundation.
Oh.
When we trust in the divine plan, even when we don't understand it, we create a sense of inner stability that helps us to navigate difficult times.
Yeah, I can see how that works. So we've got faith as this alignment with divine syntax.
Yes.
This trust in the order of the universe. But how do we actually cultivate faith?
Right.
Is it something we're born with, or is it something we can develop?
Faith is a gift, but it's also a muscle that we can strengthen through practice.
Okay.
Riker suggests that practices like prayer meditation, studying sacred texts, and engaging in acts of service can help us to cultivate and deepen our faith.
So it's not just about sitting in a church pew or reading the Bible.
Right.
It's about actively engaging with the divine.
Actively
putting our faith into action.
Exactly. The more we live our lives in alignment with divine will, the more our faith will naturally grow and deepen.
That makes sense. You know, we've been talking a lot about this idea of divine syntax.
We have.
This underlying logic that governs the universe.
Right.
It makes me think about our own human systems.
Yes.
Our institutions and how they've evolved over time. Do you think there's a connection there?
That's a fascinating question, and I think it's one that Riker would be very interested in exploring.
Oh, yeah.
This C.T.M.U. suggests that there's a deeper order to reality, a kind of cosmic blueprint that influences everything, including our human systems.
So you're saying that our institutions, our laws, our social structures, they're not just arbitrary creations.
Right.
They're somehow influenced by this divine syntax.
It's certainly an intriguing possibility.
Yeah.
Think about it. Many cultures throughout history have developed similar systems of morality, justice, and governance.
Right.
Even when they've had no contact with each other.
That's true. There are certain universal values that seem to transcend cultural differences.
Exactly. And the C.T.M.U. might offer a framework for understanding why that is.
Okay.
Perhaps these universal values are reflections of that divine syntax, of that inherent logic that underpins reality.
Okay, but if that's the case, why do we see so much conflict and dysfunction in our human systems?
Right.
If they're based on this divine logic.
Yeah.
Shouldn't they be more harmonious?
That's a great question, and it brings us back to those concepts of free will and sin.
Okay.
Even though our systems might be influenced by divine syntax, we still have the choice to align ourselves with that logic or to deviate from it.
So you're saying that when we make choices that go against that divine logic, when we act out of self-interest or greed, we create disharmony in our systems.
Exactly. And that disharmony can manifest in all sorts of ways: inequality, corruption, violence, oppression.
But if we have the power to create disharmony, then we also have the power to create harmony.
Absolutely. And this is where I think the C.T.M.U. offers a powerful message of hope.
Okay.
If we can understand that divine syntax, if we can align our choices and actions with it, we can start to create more just and harmonious systems.
So it's not just about understanding these concepts on an individual level.
Right.
It's about applying them to our collective systems, to our institutions.
To our society as a whole.
To our society as a whole.
Precisely. The C.T.M.U. isn't just a personal philosophy. It's a roadmap for social transformation.
Okay. I'm really starting to see the potential here.
Yeah.
But how do we actually go about applying these concepts to such complex systems?
Yeah.
It seems like a daunting task.
It certainly won't be easy, but I think it starts with awareness.
Okay.
We need to understand the principles of divine syntax to recognize how they're reflected in our systems and to identify the areas where we've deviated from that logic.
So it's about education.
Yes.
About raising awareness of these principles.
Raising awareness.
And about encouraging people to think about how they can apply them to their own lives and to the systems they're a part of.
Exactly. And it's also about having difficult conversations, about challenging the status quo, about being willing to question assumptions, and to explore new ways of doing things.
Okay, that makes sense. You know, this conversation has really got me thinking about the history of our institutions.
Yeah.
About how they've evolved over time, and about the forces that have shaped them. Do you think the C.T.M.U. could offer any insights into that?
I think it could be incredibly valuable in that regard. The C.T.M.U. encourages us to look at reality from a holistic perspective, to see the interconnectedness of everything, and to recognize the patterns that repeat themselves across different scales of existence.
So you're saying that by understanding the principles of divine syntax,
Hmm.
we might be able to see how they've played out in the development of our societies and institutions.
Exactly. For example, the C.T.M.U's concept of self-simulation suggests that reality is constantly creating and recreating itself through a process of information processing.
Right.
We might be able to see parallels to that in how our institutions have adapted and evolved over time.
That's fascinating.
Yeah,
It's like saying that the same principles that govern the evolution of the universe
right.
are also at work in the evolution of our societies.
Exactly. But if that's the case, then doesn't that suggest that our current systems are somehow inevitable? That they're just a product of this larger cosmic process?
Yeah.
That's a good question. And it brings us back to that tension between divine will and free will.
Okay.
While the C.T.M.U suggests there's a larger plan, a kind of cosmic blueprint,
Right.
it also acknowledges that we have the freedom to make choices to influence the direction of that plan.
So you're saying that while our systems might be shaped by these larger forces, we still have the power to change them, to steer them towards a more harmonious outcome.
Exactly. And that's where I think the C.T.M.U offers a message of both responsibility and hope.
Okay.
It reminds us that we're not just passive passengers on this cosmic journey.
Right.
We're active participants, and we have a role to play in shaping the destiny of humanity.
Okay, I'm really starting to grasp the depth and complexity of the C.T.M.U.
It is a deep rabbit hole.
It is, but I have to admit it's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is.
It makes me wonder if there are any tools or practices that can help us to integrate these ideas into our lives in a more practical way.
That's a great question. And I think the C.T.M.U itself offers a number of tools and practices that can be incredibly helpful in that regard. One that comes to mind is the concept of covert contracts.
Covert contracts.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that term. What does it mean?
So it's a term that Riker uses to describe the unspoken agreements that we make with others, often on a subconscious level.
Okay.
These agreements can shape our relationships, our behaviors, even our understanding of ourselves.
So you're saying that we're constantly making these agreements with people without even realizing it.
Yes. How does that work?
Yeah, how does that work?
Well, it's all part of how our minds process information and make sense of the world. We're constantly observing patterns, making assumptions, drawing conclusions about how things work and how people behave. And these conclusions can become ingrained in our subconscious,
Right.
influencing our interactions with others.
Okay. I can see how that happens. But how do these covert contracts relate to the C.T.M.U? What's the connection there?
Well, Riker suggests that these covert contracts can be a major source of disharmony in our lives.
Okay.
And in our relationships, they can lead to misunderstandings, conflicts, even to forms of manipulation and abuse.
So you're saying that these unspoken agreements,
Yes.
these covert contracts,
Covert contracts.
can actually create a kind of syntactic misalignment
They can.
in our relationships,
In our relationships.
just like sin creates a misalignment with divine will.
Exactly. And just like with sin,
Okay.
the process of healing and restoring harmony involves recognizing these misalignments and making conscious choices to correct them.
Okay, so how do we go about identifying and addressing these covert contracts in our lives?
Right.
It seems like it would be difficult to recognize something that's operating on a subconscious level.
It can be challenging, but it's not impossible. It starts with self-awareness, with paying attention to our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors in our relationships.
So it's about being more mindful in our interactions.
Be more mindful.
About noticing the patterns that repeat themselves. And about being willing to question why we're doing what we're doing.
Exactly. And it's also about communication.
Okay.
About being open and honest with ourselves and with others about what we're feeling and what we need.
Okay, that makes sense. So by becoming more aware of these covert contracts, by bringing them to the surface, and by having honest conversations about them,
Yes.
we can start to create more harmonious and fulfilling relationships.
Exactly. And that process of creating harmony in our relationships can also have a ripple effect on the larger systems we're a part of,
Right.
contributing to a greater sense of alignment and purpose in society as a whole.
Wow, this is all incredibly insightful.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about the hidden dynamics at play in our lives and in our relationships.
It does.
And it offers like a practical framework for addressing those dynamics and creating more harmonious outcomes. That's one of the things I find so compelling about the C.T.M.U. It's not just a theory.
Right.
It's a set of tools for living.
It is.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about covert contracts, but I'm curious to know, are there any other tools or practices that Riker offers for applying the principles of the C.T.M.U to our lives?
One that comes to mind is the practice of infocognitive auditing.
Infocognitive auditing.
Yeah, it's a process of examining our beliefs, assumptions, and thought patterns to identify areas where we might be stuck in limiting or distorted perceptions.
So like taking a mental inventory.
Yeah, like a mental inventory.
Looking for those bugs in the system
Exactly.
that might be preventing us from aligning with that divine syntax.
Precisely. And it's a process that requires honesty, courage, and a willingness to let go of beliefs and patterns that no longer serve us.
Okay, so infocognitive auditing is about challenging our own thinking.
It is.
About identifying those areas where we might be out of sync with reality.
Out of sync with reality.
But how do we actually go about doing that?
Yeah.
What are some of the steps involved?
Well, Riker suggests a few key steps.
Okay.
And one of the most important is to cultivate a sense of detachment from our thoughts.
Detachment from our thoughts.
Detachment from our thoughts.
What does that mean?
It means learning to observe our thoughts without judgment.
Okay.
Without getting caught up in their stories and dramas.
So it's like stepping back from the mental chatter.
Stepping back from the chatter.
Becoming a witness to our own thought processes.
Yes.
Rather than identifying with them.
Exactly. And this detachment allows us to see our thoughts more objectively.
Okay.
To recognize which ones are helpful and which ones are harmful.
Okay. I can see how that would be valuable.
Yeah.
So by detaching from our thoughts, we can start to see them more clearly.
More clearly.
And that allows us to identify those that might be leading us astray.
Leading us astray.
What's the next step in the process of infocognitive auditing?
Once we've identified a thought that's causing us problems,
right,
the next step is to question it.
Question it.
Question it.
How do we do that?
Well, Riker suggests asking ourselves a series of questions about the thought.
Okay.
Such as, is this thought true?
Mm-hmm.
Is it helpful?
Okay.
Does it align with my values?
Right.
Does it serve my highest good?
So it's about holding our thoughts up to a higher standard.
A higher standard.
A standard of truth, goodness, and alignment with our values.
Exactly. And by doing this, we can start to weed out the thoughts that are based on fear, insecurity, or limiting beliefs.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this works. So by detaching from our thoughts and questioning them, we can start to identify and release those that are causing us problems.
Yes.
But what about the thoughts that are true?
Right.
Are there any thoughts that we shouldn't question?
Even thoughts that are true can be harmful if they're not aligned with our values or if they don't serve our highest good.
Can you give me an example?
Sure.
Well.
Let's say you have the thought, I'm not good enough.
Okay.
That thought might be based on past experiences or on negative messages you've received from others. Right.
And it might even be true in a certain context.
Okay.
But if you hold on to that thought,
right,
if you believe it without question,
yeah,
it can prevent you from achieving your full potential.
So even if a thought is true,
even if it's true,
we still need to ask ourselves if it's helpful.
Is it helpful?
If it's empowering.
Is it empowering?
If it's moving us in the direction we want to go.
Exactly. And this is where discernment comes in.
Okay.
It's about developing the ability to distinguish between thoughts that are aligned with our highest good.
Right.
And those that are holding us back.
Okay, that makes sense. So infocognitive auditing is about becoming more aware of our thoughts, detaching from them, questioning them, and choosing those that align with our values and our highest good.
Choosing those that align.
But what about the thoughts that we've already released?
Right.
What happens to them?
Riker suggests that when we release a thought, we're essentially releasing it back into the infocognitive system of the universe. So it's like sending a piece of data back into the cosmic cloud.
Exactly. And this is where the concept of grace comes in.
Okay.
Riker believes that when we release a harmful thought, it can be transformed by divine grace into something positive and beneficial.
That's a beautiful idea.
It is.
So it's not just about getting rid of negative thoughts.
Right.
It's about contributing to the evolution of the universe.
Well, the evolution.
By offering those thoughts up for transformation.
Exactly. And this process of releasing and transforming thoughts is an ongoing one.
Okay.
It's part of our spiritual growth and evolution.
Okay, so infocognitive auditing is this powerful tool.
It is.
For examining our thoughts, challenging them, choosing those that serve our highest good. But what about our actions?
Right.
How does the C.T.M.U. guide us in making choices and taking actions that are aligned with divine syntax?
Well, one of the key principles of the C.T.M.U. is the idea of teleology,
Okay.
which we discussed earlier.
Right.
Teleology is the study of purpose. And Riker argues that everything in the universe has a purpose, a reason for existing.
So it's not just about randomly going through life.
Yeah.
It's about discovering our purpose and aligning our actions with that purpose.
Exactly. And Riker suggests that our individual purpose is always aligned with the divine plan,
Okay.
with the unfolding of that cosmic blueprint.
Okay. But how do we actually figure out what our purpose is?
Right.
It seems like such a big question.
It is a big question.
And there are so many different paths we could take in life.
There are.
So how do we choose the right one?
Well, it can be a daunting task,
Mm-hmm.
but the C.T.M.U. offers a few helpful guidelines.
Okay.
One of the most important is to pay attention to our intuition, to those inner nudges and synchronicities that seem to guide us in a certain direction.
So it's about listening to that inner voice,
Yes, that gut feeling.
that gut feeling that tells us what feels right and what feels wrong.
Exactly. And it's also about paying attention to the opportunities that present themselves, to the doors that open and the paths that unfold before us.
Okay, so we need to be, so we've been talking about the C.T.M.U., this idea of divine syntax, and how it applies to everything from our personal lives to the evolution of human societies. But let's bring it back to something a little more concrete. What does the C.T.M.U. have to say about how we should live our lives day to day?
Well, one of the most practical aspects of the C.T.M.U. is its emphasis on moral responsibility. If we truly believe that our thoughts, choices, and actions have a ripple effect on the universe, then it becomes imperative to act in a way that's aligned with that divine syntax.
So it's not enough to just understand these concepts intellectually.
Right.
We have to actually live them out.
Exactly. The C.T.M.U. isn't just a philosophy, it's a way of life. It's about making choices that are informed by that universal logic, by that inherent goodness that Riker talks about.
Okay, so what does that look like in practice?
Yeah.
What are some examples of how we can apply the principles of the C.T.M.U. to our daily lives?
One example is the way we treat other people. The C.T.M.U. emphasizes the interconnectedness of all things, so harming another person is ultimately harming ourselves. It's creating a disruption in that divine syntax.
So it's not just about being nice to people.
Right.
It's about recognizing that we're all part of the same fabric, that our actions have consequences that extend far beyond ourselves.
Precisely. And this applies not just to our personal relationships, but also to the way we interact with society as a whole.
You give me an example.
Sure. Think about something like environmentalism.
Okay.
From a C.T.M.U. perspective, harming the environment is a form of syntactic misalignment. It's disrupting the balance of the ecosystem, which ultimately impacts all of us.
Okay, that makes sense. So living in accordance with the C.T.M.U. means taking responsibility for our actions, recognizing that they have consequences, and making choices that contribute to the harmony and well-being of the whole.
Exactly. And this includes taking care of ourselves both physically and mentally.
So it's not just about focusing on the external world. It's
Right.
about cultivating inner harmony as well.
Absolutely. The C.T.M.U. recognizes that we're complex beings with both physical and spiritual needs, and it encourages us to nurture all aspects of ourselves.
That makes sense. You know, one of the things that I find really appealing about the C.T.M.U. is that it offers a framework for understanding the world that's both rational and spiritual. It's not about blind faith. It's about using our minds to understand the nature of reality and then aligning our lives with that understanding.
I agree, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's resonating with so many people today.
Yeah.
We're living in a time of great uncertainty and change, and people are searching for meaning and purpose. The C.T.M.U. offers a way to make sense of the world that's both intellectually satisfying and spiritually fulfilling.
Absolutely. And it empowers us to take an active role in shaping our own destiny and the destiny of humanity.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've explored some pretty deep concepts, but hopefully you found this deep dive into the C.T.M.U. as fascinating as I have.
It's been a pleasure discussing these ideas with you. And for our listeners who are intrigued by what they've heard today, I encourage you to check out Conrad Riker's book, Universal Mind, Theology of Infocognition. You can find it on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
It's a book that will challenge your assumptions, expand your understanding, and perhaps even transform your perspective on reality itself.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into Conrad Riker's Universal Mind. We hope you've enjoyed exploring these mind-bending concepts with us. Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.